The heavy cream envelope landed on my mahogany desk with a thud that sounded more like a threat than an invitation. It was thick, textured cardstock, sealed with gold wax, and the moment I picked it up, the scent hit me. It smelled exactly like jasmine rouge, the custom perfume blend I had worn exclusively for 10 years. My sister didn't just steal my fiancé, she was trying to wear my skin. I slid my silver letter opener under the seal, my hand steady, my pulse flat. Inside, the calligraphy mocked me in looping, elegant script. Together with their families, Tiffany Sterling and Julian Thorne invite you to celebrate their union. The venue, the St. Regis in Aspen. The date, October 14th, my 30th birthday. And scrawled across the bottom in Tiffany's chaotic, childish handwriting were the words, "Come see what true love looks like." My name is Morgan Sterling. To the outside world, I am nobody, just the quiet sister in the background of paparazzi photos. But inside the glass walls of the Sterling Medical Group, I am the chief compliance officer. I am the reason the FDA doesn't shut us down. I am the reason our stock price survives quarterly audits. I am the invisible engine that keeps this billion-dollar machine running, while my sister Tiffany is the hood ornament. If you have ever been the person doing all the work while someone else gets all the applause, drop a like on this video. And if you have ever watched your own family bet on the wrong horse because she was shinier, prettier, and louder, you need to subscribe right now. Because what I did at this wedding didn't just ruin a reception, it erased a legacy. To understand why I didn't rip that invitation to shreds, you have to understand the Sterling dynamic. My parents, Richard and Catherine, are obsessed with optics. To them, business isn't about profit margins or ethical compliance. It is about magazine covers and gala dinners. They viewed me as a utility, useful, necessary, but unglamorous. Tiffany, on the other hand, was their star. She had failed as an actress in Hollywood, failed as a model in New York, and failed as an influencer in Miami. But when she came crawling back to Seattle 2 years ago, my parents invented a role for her, Chief Brand Ambassador. They gave her an unlimited expense account and told her to be the face of the company. And then they gave her Julian. Julian was the CFO I had trained. He was the man I had dated for 4 years. We were partners in every sense of the word, or so I thought. We were supposed to take over the company together when my father retired. But Julian was an opportunist. He did the math and realized that while I was the engine, Tiffany was the favorite. He dumped me over a 3-minute voicemail and proposed to Tiffany 6 weeks later. My parents were thrilled. They called it a power match. They told me I should be happy for the family. They told me I was too serious for a man like Julian anyway. I sat in my office, the invitation open on my desk, staring at the date, October 14th. That was the date Julian and I had tentatively picked for our own wedding, before he left. The St. Regis was the venue I had researched. The jasmine rouge scent on the paper was my signature. Tiffany hadn't just planned a wedding, she had Xeroxed my life and pasted her face over mine. Most women would have cried. Most women would have called their mother screaming. I did neither. I simply reached into the bottom drawer of my desk and pulled out a plain, polished walnut box. It had been delivered to me 3 weeks ago by Mr. Vance, my late grandmother Victoria's personal attorney. Victoria Sterling was the founder of this company. She was a woman of iron will and zero tolerance for fools. She hated what her son, my father, had turned into, and she loathed Tiffany's vapid spending. But she respected me. She saw the late nights I pulled fixing Julian's sloppy financial reports. She saw the way I navigated the regulatory compliance nightmares Tiffany created with her loose lips in interviews. When Mr. Vance handed me the box, he gave me a single instruction. Your grandmother wrote a specific bylaw into the corporate charter 40 years ago. She called it the Clean Successor Clause. She knew this day would come, Morgan. She knew they would try to push you out. Do not open this box until you are ready to burn it all down. I ran my fingers over the smooth wood of the box. I knew what was inside because I had spent the last 3 weeks with Mr. Vance verifying every single piece of paper it contained. I knew about the $200,000 Tiffany had wired to a fixer in Los Angeles to bury a DUI charge, money she embezzled from the charity fund. I knew about the clinical trial data Julian had falsified to artificially inflate the stock price before the quarter closed, a federal crime that carried a minimum of 10 years in prison. They thought I was silent because I was weak. They thought I was working late nights to be a good employee. They had no idea I was documenting every single felony they committed to fund their true love. My phone buzzed. It was a text from my mother. "We assume you will do the mature thing and decline the invite, Morgan. We don't need a dark cloud hovering over Tiffany's big day. We'll tell everyone you're busy with the audit." I looked at the text. Then I looked at the invitation. Then I looked at the walnut box. I picked up my office phone and dialed my executive assistant. "Sarah, clear my schedule for the week of October 14th. Book a flight to Aspen, first class." "Yes, Miss Sterling," Sarah said, her voice professional, though I knew she was confused. "And shall I send a decline for the wedding RSVP?" "No," I said, a smile spreading across my face that felt sharp enough to cut glass. "Mark me down as attending. And Sarah, call the bridal salon on Fifth Avenue. Tell them I need an appointment for a rush order." "A rush order, ma'am? For what?" "A dress," I replied, my voice calm, steady, and terrifyingly cheerful. "And tell them I don't want cream or ivory or champagne. I want white, optical, blinding, pure white." I hung up the phone and picked up the pen to fill out the RSVP card. Under number of guests, I wrote 1. Under dietary restrictions, I wrote none. And under the notes section, right next to Tiffany's taunt, I wrote my own message in strict block letters. I wouldn't miss it for the world. I'll bring the gift. I placed the RSVP card in the outgoing mail tray. I wasn't going to Aspen to celebrate a marriage. I was going to execute a corporate merger. And the only thing I was bringing to the altar was the truth. 3 weeks before that cream envelope landed on my desk, I was sitting in a leather wingback chair in an office that smelled of old paper and expensive scotch. This wasn't the glass and steel headquarters of Sterling Medical. This was the private practice of Arthur Vance, the only man my grandmother Victoria ever trusted. He slid a heavy file across the mahogany desk. It wasn't digital. It wasn't on the company server. It was hard copy, original ink, authenticated, and notarized. "Your grandmother knew this day would come, Morgan," Mr. Vance said. "She watched your father indulge Tiffany. She watched Julian's ambition outgrow his ethics. And she wrote an insurance policy." He opened the Sterling Medical Group corporate charter to page 42. A single paragraph was highlighted in yellow. Bylaw 19.4. It was known as the Clean Successor Clause, but in legal terms, it was a guillotine. The clause was explicit. It stated that upon the retirement or incapacity of the current CEO, my father, majority voting control would not pass to his designated heir automatically. Instead, it would bypass the parents entirely and vest immediately in the eldest grandchild, provided that grandchild had a spotless fiduciary record. But here was the trapdoor. The clause also stated that any potential heir found to have committed acts of financial malfeasance, fraud, or material misrepresentation would be permanently disinherited and stripped of all company shares, effective immediately. "They think they are untouchable because your father protects them," Mr. Vance said. "But your father doesn't own the controlling interest. The trust does, and the trust follows Bylaw 19.4. I opened the dossier. What I saw made my blood run cold, not as a sister, but as a compliance officer. First, there was Tiffany. My sister hadn't just overspent her budget, she was a criminal. There were wire transfers totaling $200,000 labeled Crisis Management Consulting. I traced the recipient LLC. It wasn't a PR firm. It was a shell company, owned by a fixer in Los Angeles who specialized in making problems disappear. Specifically, a DUI hit-and-run Tiffany had been involved in 6 months ago. She had used company funds, shareholder money, to pay off a victim and silence the police report. That was embezzlement. Then there was Julian. I looked at the FDA Phase 3 clinical trial reports for our new cardiac drug. I knew these numbers. I had seen the raw data myself, which showed a 12% efficacy rate, a failure. But the documents Julian had submitted to the board, the ones that had pumped our stock price up by 40% last quarter, showed an 82% efficacy rate. He hadn't just massaged the numbers, he had fabricated them entirely. That wasn't just firing material, that was securities fraud. That was 10 years in federal prison. I looked up at Mr. Vance. They are building a dynasty on a sinkhole. And you, Mr. Vance said, handing me the walnut box, are the only one standing on solid ground. When you open this box, Morgan, you become the majority shareholder. You become the CEO. But you have to catch them in the act of accepting the legacy. You have to let them climb all the way to the top of the mountain before you push them off. Back in the present, I packed my suitcase for Aspen. My family assumed I was coming to beg for scraps of affection. They thought I was weak. Julian even had the audacity to text me the night before my flight. "Glad you're coming, Morgan. It shows a lot of maturity. Try not to wear black. We want the photos to look happy." I stared at the message. Try not to wear black? He thought I was in mourning. He thought I was grieving the loss of a relationship that was built on lies. He had no idea I was bringing an indictment wrapped in walnut wood. I grabbed my purse and headed to the most exclusive bridal salon in Seattle. I didn't have an appointment, but when you are a Sterling, doors open. The manager rushed over, looking confused when I told her I needed a gown for a wedding in 48 hours. "Of course, Miss Sterling," she said, eyeing my business suit. "And what is the color scheme? Usually for guests, we recommend a nice charcoal or perhaps a navy." "I'm not a guest," I said, walking past the racks of sensible evening wear and heading straight for the bridal section. "I need something else." I stopped in front of a mannequin. The dress was aggressive. It was a structured, architectural masterpiece in blinding, optical white silk. It had a sharp neckline and a train that demanded space. It wasn't a dress for a blushing bride. It was a dress for a conqueror. "I'll take this one," I said. The manager gasped. "Miss Sterling, that is a bridal gown. You can't wear white to your sister's wedding. It's a declaration of war." I pulled out my black credit card, the one I paid off every month with my own salary, not my father's money. "That," I said, handing her the card, "is exactly the point. Tailor it. I want it ready by tomorrow morning." I walked out of the shop into the rain. I wasn't going to Aspen to object when the priest asked if anyone had a reason why these two should not be wed. I was going to Aspen to ensure that when they said "I do," they were saying yes to an audit. The courtyard of the St. Regis in Aspen was transformed into a cathedral of ego. Thousands of white orchids draped from the canopy, and the air smelled of expensive champagne and crisp mountain pine. But the real scent in the air was money. My parents had invited the entire board of directors, our biggest institutional investors, and the partners from the venture capital firms we were courting for the Series B funding. They weren't here to witness a marriage. They were here to witness the coronation of the new Sterling power couple. I waited until the very last second. The ushers had closed the heavy oak doors. The string quartet had just lifted their bows to begin the prelude for the bridal procession. The guests were settled, a sea of designer tuxedos and pastel gowns waiting for Tiffany. Instead, they got me. I pushed the double doors open with both hands. The heavy wood groaned, and the sound echoed through the silent courtyard. Heads turned. A few people smiled, expecting the bride. Then the smiles vanished. I stepped into the late afternoon sun wearing the dress. It was architectural perfection. Sharp angles, high neck, long sleeves, and a train that pooled around my feet like liquid mercury. And it was white, not ivory, not eggshell. It was a blinding, optical, diamond white that reflected the sun so intensely it hurt to look at. A collective gasp ripped through the audience. It started in the back row and rolled forward like a wave. In the world of high society etiquette, wearing white to a wedding isn't just a faux pas. It is a declaration of war. It screams that you do not respect the bride, the family, or the occasion. I didn't look at the guests. I locked eyes with Julian standing at the altar. He looked impeccable in his Tom Ford tuxedo, but as I started my slow walk down the center aisle, his composure cracked. His eyes widened. He looked from my face to the white dress, and his skin turned the color of ash. He knew. In that split second, he realized that the quiet, compliant Morgan he had dumped was gone. My mother, seated in the front row, actually half rose from her seat. Her hand flew to her mouth, her knuckles white against her pearls. She frantically gestured to the head of security, a man named Davis who had known me since I was 12. Davis took a step forward, then stopped. He saw the look on my face, cold, calm, and absolutely lethal. He also knew I was a significant shareholder. He wasn't going to tackle a board member in front of the press. I reached the front of the aisle. I didn't take my seat in the second row where the sister card was placed. Instead, I stopped directly in front of my parents. I looked down at my father, the man who had dismissed my career as administrative support, and gave him a small, icy nod. Then I sat down in the empty seat right next to the aisle, placing the walnut box on my lap. The music faltered, then restarted. The doors opened again. Tiffany appeared. She looked beautiful, I'll give her that. She was wearing a custom Vera Wang in a soft, creamy ivory. But as she walked down the aisle, the whispers weren't about her radiance. They were about the sister in the front row wearing the brighter, whiter, sharper dress. Tiffany's smile faltered as she got closer. She saw me. Her eyes narrowed into slits of pure venom. If looks could kill, I would have dropped dead on the rose petals. She reached the altar and took her place beside Julian. The tension in the courtyard was so thick you could choke on it. The officiant, a bishop my parents had flown in, cleared his throat nervously. "Dearly beloved," he began, his voice wavering slightly, "we are gathered here to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony." I sat perfectly still, my hand resting on the smooth lid of the walnut box. I watched Julian's hands shaking at his sides. I watched a bead of sweat roll down his temple. He wasn't listening to the vows. He was watching the box. The ceremony dragged on. They exchanged rings. They lit a unity candle. My mother was weeping, likely from stress rather than joy. The board members in the rows behind me were shifting in their seats, sensing that the script had gone off the rails. Then came the moment. The bishop took a breath and looked out over the crowd. "If anyone here can show just cause why these two may not be lawfully joined together, let them speak now or forever hold their peace." The silence that followed was absolute. It was heavy, suffocating, and terrifying. My mother squeezed her father's hand, praying for the moment to pass. Tiffany glared at the audience, daring anyone to breathe. Julian squeezed his eyes shut. I didn't scream. I didn't make a scene. I simply stood up. The sound of my silk dress rustling was the only noise in the courtyard. I stepped into the aisle, the white train flowing behind me. I didn't look at the guests. I walked straight up the stairs to the altar. The bishop took a stumbling step back. Tiffany spun around, her face twisted in rage. "Morgan, what the hell are you doing?" she hissed, low enough that the microphones barely caught it. "Sit down." I didn't answer her. I turned to the audience, scanning the faces until I found Marcus Sterling, the chairman of the board. No relation, but a man who cared about profit over blood. Then I turned back to the couple. I lifted the walnut box and placed it gently on the small table between them, right next to the unity candle. "I object," I said, my voice calm, clear, and amplified by the silence. Tiffany lunged for the box, her perfectly manicured nails clawing at the wood. "Don't you dare touch that! Security, get her out of here!" But security didn't move. Davis, the head of our detail, stood by the entrance with his arms crossed. He worked for Sterling Medical, not for Tiffany, and he knew exactly who signed the compliance checks that kept his pension fund legal. I ignored my sister's screeching. I flipped the brass latch on the walnut box and lifted the lid. Inside, nestled in velvet, wasn't a piece of jewelry or a sentimental keepsake. It was a black industrial-grade tablet and a wireless HDMI transmitter. I pulled out the transmitter and walked over to the AV station set up to the side of the altar. It was meant to play a montage of Tiffany and Julian's love story, a slideshow of curated vacations and staged candid moments. I pulled the cord from their laptop and plugged in my transmitter. The massive LED screen behind the altar flickered. The photo of Tiffany and Julian kissing in Paris disappeared. "What is this?" Julian stammered, his face glistening with sweat. "Morgan, stop this right now. You're making a scene." "No, Julian," I said into the bishop's microphone, my voice echoing off the canyon walls. "I'm making a disclosure." The screen behind me blazed to life. "Exhibit A," I announced. A high-resolution bank wire transfer filled the 20-foot screen. It showed a withdrawal of $200,000 from the Sterling Charity Foundation. The recipient was a shell company in Los Angeles known for fixing PR disasters. The memo line was blank, but the date matched the exact night of Tiffany's unreported DUI crash. "Tiffany," I said, turning to my sister, whose face had gone from angry to deathly pale, "embezzling charitable funds to cover up a crime isn't just a PR crisis, it is a felony. And since you used the company's server to authorize it, you just pierced the corporate veil." A murmur ripped through the crowd. My mother buried her face in her hands. I swiped the tablet. Exhibit B. This was the kill shot. The screen changed to a side-by-side comparison of two documents. On the left was the raw data from our Phase 3 cardiac trials, the actual results showing a 12% efficacy rate. On the right was the report Julian had submitted to the board and the SEC, the one claiming 82% efficacy. "Julian," I said, looking at the man I had once loved, "you falsified clinical data to artificially inflate the stock price before the Series B funding closed. That is securities fraud. That is 20 years in federal prison." The silence in the courtyard shattered. Marcus Sterling, the chairman of the board, stood up in the third row. He wasn't looking at the bride or groom. He was looking at his phone, likely checking the stock ticker. Then he looked at Julian with eyes cold enough to freeze hell. "Julian," Marcus boomed, his voice shaking with rage, "is this data accurate?" Julian opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked at Tiffany, then at his parents, then at the exit. He looked like a rat trapped in a glass box. I can explain, Julian squeaked. It was a projection, a theoretical model. It was a lie, I corrected, and I have already sent the raw data to the FDA and the SEC. The investigation starts tomorrow morning. My father stood up then, his face purple. Morgan, you have destroyed this family. You have destroyed this company. Get out. I swiped the tablet one last time. Not quite, Father. Exhibit C. The screen displayed the yellow highlighted text of Bylaw 19.4, the clean successor clause. I read it aloud, my voice steady. In the event that the primary heirs are found to have committed acts of financial malfeasance or fraud, majority control bypasses the current generation and vests immediately in the eldest grandchild with a spotless fiduciary record. I closed the walnut box with a snap that sounded like a gunshot. As of this moment, I said, looking at the board members, the investors, and my terrified parents, I am the majority shareholder of Sterling Medical Group. I am the acting CEO. I turned to Julian. You're fired. Security will escort you off the property. Do not go back to the office. Your badge has already been deactivated. I turned to Tiffany. You are removed from the board effective immediately. Your expense account is frozen. You will be hearing from legal regarding the restitution of the stolen $200,000. I turned to the bishop, who looked like he wanted to be anywhere else on earth. I apologize for the interruption, Father. You may continue with the wedding if you wish, but they will be paying for it with their own money. I unplugged the transmitter. The screen went black. I didn't wait for a response. I didn't wait for my mother's sobbing or my father's shouting. I picked up the walnut box, turned on my heel, and walked back down the aisle. The sea of guests parted for me. No one whispered, no one laughed. They looked at me with a mixture of terror and awe. As I passed Marcus Sterling, he gave me a single, sharp nod of respect. I walked through the heavy oak doors, out of the courtyard, and into the cool Aspen air. I didn't look back at the ruin I had left behind. I had walked in as a sister, but I was walking out as the boss. 4 months later, the executive suite of Sterling Medical Group looked nothing like the mausoleum my father had built. I had stripped the dark wood paneling and replaced it with glass, letting the Seattle gray light flood the room. On the corner of my new, expansive desk sat the polished walnut box, now empty of its weapons, but heavy with history. The fallout from the wedding had been absolute. The footage of my toast hadn't just stayed in Aspen, it had leaked to the Wall Street Journal within hours. Our stock took a 20% hit on Monday morning, but by Wednesday, it had rebounded higher than ever. The market loves certainty, and nothing says certainty like a CEO who publicly purges fraud from her own bloodline. Julian never made it to the honeymoon. He was arrested by federal agents at the Denver airport while trying to board a flight to non-extradition territory. The SEC investigation was swift and brutal. He is currently awaiting trial for securities fraud and conspiracy, and his lawyer is trying to cut a plea deal that involves testifying against my father. I almost feel bad for him. Almost. Tiffany's world collapsed in a different way. The moment the news broke about the embezzlement, her brand deals evaporated. The influencers who had populated her wedding photos scrubbed her from their feeds. She is currently living in a rented condo in Bellevue, suing the company for wrongful termination. My legal team, led by Mr. Vance's firm, is countersuing for the $200,000 plus interest. Last I heard, she was trying to launch a podcast about toxic families. It has 12 subscribers. As for my parents, the board of directors gave them a choice: involuntary removal or quiet retirement. They chose the latter. They live in a smaller house in Medina now, on a fixed stipend from the family trust that I control. I haven't spoken to them since the wedding, but I send them a quarterly report on the company's performance. The numbers are up 30%. It's the pettiest thing I do, and I enjoy every second of it. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the city. I was wearing a white suit today, a nod to the dress that changed everything. People think revenge is about screaming. They think it's about making a scene. But the most effective revenge is silence. It is the quiet accumulation of power. It is the patience to wait until your enemies are standing at the altar of their own ego before you pull the rug out from under them. I turned back to my desk. I had a meeting with the FDA in 10 minutes to present the real data for our cardiac drug. It wasn't as flashy as Julian's fake numbers, but it was honest, and it was going to save lives. Competence isn't sexy. It doesn't get you magazine covers or thousands of likes on Instagram. But when the music stops and the lights come up, competence is the only thing left standing. If you are the person doing the work while others take the credit, keep your head down, keep your receipts, and when the time comes, don't just take a seat at the table. Build your own table and make sure it's made of solid walnut. I'm Morgan Sterling. This is my company now, and we are just getting started.